Hi, I'm Dr. Duke, and this is The Takeaway, back again with our good friend Alex Newman. And it is tragic. Every time Alex and I seem to get together, we have a pathetic I told you so moment. Things that we've been warning moms and dads about for a long time are unfortunately now coming to reality. And this is a big one, Alex. We've got the federal government sponsoring really, really invasive surveys of all of America's government school kids. And they're using grants, in other words, bribes, to compel schools to give these really inappropriate surveys to their kids. Talk a little bit about what we're dealing with.
Well, thank you, Duke. And, I would encourage people to go out and look at these surveys for themselves, because it almost sounds too out there to be true. But I've seen the surveys, I've seen the results, and you're absolutely right. The CDC is pushing these on school districts all over the country by offering them quote unquote grants if they'll administer these surveys to the poor kids. And in these surveys, they're asking literally 10-year-old children, 11-year-old children, whether they've had oral sex, what their house is like, how many sexual intercourse partners they've had, whether somebody in their house uses drugs, whether somebody at home screams at them, whether they've thought about suicide recently, whether they've tried to kill themselves, all these things. Probably many of these poor little kids have never even heard about a lot of this stuff. Oral sex, what is that? Suicide, what is that? But you can bet that when they finish with these tests, they're going to go whip out the computer and check it out. They're going to, talk to their friends about it. And so this is just dangerous all around, putting these thoughts in the kids' minds, gathering this data, and, they pretend like this is anonymous. They say, oh, well, it's not uniquely identifiable. We're not going to know who gave answers to what questions. And then we come to find out that actually these surveys are being administered on government-issued laptops, government-issued smart devices that have unique ID numbers associated with the child. So if they wanted to find out, I suspect that they could. And, we all know how honest and trustworthy the government is. So, take what they say with a grain of salt.
Yeah, we're being incredibly naive to believe that these so-called free computers, laptops, devices that these kids are getting, that somehow there's anonymity when they're all associated with unique user ID numbers. They are gathering this information on your kids. And it makes sense, right? The CDC forces these really inappropriate surveys, the federal government does, into the schools, forces the states, bribes the states with all this grant money, our own tax dollars, our own parental tax dollars being used to bribe schools to grill our own kids with these surveys. And so the other thing that's really shocking about this is not just the inappropriateness of it, but they're also asking kids to make judgment calls, things that a 10-year-old won't know. For instance, how many times in the last year or the last month have your parents been unable to pay their bills? How many times have your parents not been able to provide enough food for you to eat? These are things that you're asking little children to make value judgments on things that parents don't necessarily talk to kids about. What mom and dad is going to sit there and say to their kid, we don't have the money to pay the rent, and so at 10 years old, we want you fretting about that, right? So go up to your room and fret. Moms and dads don't share the financial details with their little kids. And these are judgment calls. They're asking kids to basically narc or rat on their parents by asking highly suggestive questions that sort of push certain answers.
That's exactly right. And, the potential for mischief here is just off the charts. How long until, it becomes in the greater good, in the interest of the common good, that, a kid said they were getting screamed at home. We better send some social service people to go over and investigate the home. And we know that they're doing these kinds of things. I've reported many times on these federal documents coming out from Health and Human Services and Housing and Urban Development, where they're talking about mandatory home visits for all families, for all parents, funded by the federal government to check on, whether the government thinks your parenting style is appropriate. This is Orwellian in the extreme. I literally have a document from the Obama administration's Health and Human Services Department where they refer to parents as equal partners with the government in the raising of their own children. I mean, what kind of Orwellian Brave New World, you excuse all the metaphors, the cliches, are we moving into? It's just absolutely terrifying where we're going. And unfortunately, I think a lot of parents either don't realize that this is all happening or they don't care, which is almost more frightening still, that we're moving into this place. And a lot of parents are like, oh, well, good, less responsibility for me, let somebody else worry about it. This is going to lead to absolute disaster. The government has no business knowing these things. The government has no business putting the thoughts of suicide and sexual activity in the minds of 10 and 11-year-old children. And yet this is happening all across the country.
We need to give a little credit to Shannon Joy, a lot of credit, actually. Shannon is a radio talk show host and an advocate for kids in New York State, a wonderful activist, and she helped bring this to our attention. I know you interviewed her. Talk a little bit about what Shannon shared with you and Shannon's perspective on this.
Sure. Well, thanks so much, Stu, for bringing her up. She is the one who actually brought this all to our attention to begin with. And she really is an expert in these different areas. She's a radio host, executive producer, I believe, of her own show as well. And she knows a lot about what's going on, and she really understands. And, obviously she's concerned enough to do something about it. She yanked her child out of school and put him in a Christian school, is what she told me. So she clearly understands that, this is not how things should be. So, thank you very much to her for her efforts at exposing these things, for bringing these things to our attention. And, she actually made me think about a lot of things that I probably wouldn't have thought about, including this idea that, by asking these poor kids these questions, they're putting ideas in their mind that they never would have thought about. What 10-year-old is going to be thinking about sexual activity or suicide? That's just not something 10-year-olds think about. But then, they see, how many sexual partners have you had? And they think, oh, well, I guess all the cool kids are doing it. All my friends must be doing it. And, it's unimaginably horrible that this stuff is going on. And so thank you very much to Shannon Joy for bringing it to our attention.
Yeah, and I think that's the way we want to wind down. I mean, Shannon mentioned that, even with the sexuality issues, there are leading questions. I thought that was really a fascinating statement, that they're asking kids questions in such a way as to make them think that other kids, many other kids, most other kids across the country have already had, by the time they're age 10, sexual encounters, and that maybe the implication is these kids should feel bad for not having that information, those experiences. Can you say a final word about that?
Parents, if you're watching this and you still have kids in the government schools, you need to go to FreedomProject.com and start reading some of the articles there, because we're exposing this stuff on a daily basis. It's almost too horrible to even contemplate, but it's happening, and you have a duty to protect your kids from this.
And Alex, give the parents, we didn't talk about this yet, the actual name of this particular survey, so that if they're so inclined, they can go to their government schools and demand to know whether their kids have been given it.
There seems to be a few different names under which it's going by. It's generally something to do with youth risk behavior survey, youth risk assessment, things like that. And actually, if you go to our article on this, you'll see I have a link to the CDC webpage where they talk about this. You can get all the information you need to then go to your local school district and ask them what is going on here.
And I assume the answer is not yet, but has the CDC given any indication, the Centers for Disease Control, given any indication of what they intend to do with all this information?
No, they on their website they write like, oh, we're just trying to monitor these behaviors and we just want to make sure our kids are safe. If the government really wanted to make sure of that, they wouldn't be funding Planned Parenthood, which butchers children by the millions. So, we know that they're not telling the truth when they tell us that this is for good intentioned reasons. And parents, put your thinking caps on. Like I tell my students, you need to be thinking about what all this means, and you need to be protecting your kids.
And finally, what this means too, if these kids are going to be getting these surveys, and these surveys are gathering all sorts of personal data about families that is linked to the student's unique user number on the computers they're using, parents are going to have to find themselves in a very difficult situation. If kids are being asked to report serious financial and personal data that mom and dad are dealing with, even if they don't know what that is, if they're asked to make judgments about this, isn't that going to, at some level, compel parents to start having to have these conversations with kids simply to protect themselves from what the government might do? So you're forcing parents now, by these surveys, which are being accrued, the information's being saved. In a way, you're beginning to force parents to have conversations with kids that they shouldn't themselves be having, because it might come out in the course of these surveys anyway.
That's exactly right. And, then some parents are going to say, oh, don't tell the government, this, or, lie on that. And there's so much potential for mischief. There's so much wrong with this whole idea that, you need to be on the phone with your congressman. You need to be on the phone with your senators. You need to be on the phone with your governor and with your school district and with everybody else and find out what's going on and how we can stop it.
Alex, thanks for keeping this information at the forefront of our consciousness. Thanks also to Shannon Joy. We'll see you again next week, Alex, for another takeaway. If you enjoyed this video and all of our videos, please consider a tax-deductible donation so we can keep the whole thing free for you. I'm Dr. Duke. Thanks for watching.